Chapter 2. Hello!
Hello!
Peacemaker grinned as he listened to the echo of his voice bounce across the craggy walls of the canyon the city was built into. It was so fun to yell out something and hear its echo. Living in the rainforest, Peacemaker only ever heard the noises of the distant chirping of birds and insects, never the sound of voices ringing in the air. While he preferred the cover of trees, Peacemaker could not deny he did not mind the sight of a city built into the canyons. The dragons who built such a city must have lived here for thousands of years. A shame there was no one around. But, Peacemaker reasoned, if he searched the city, he would be able to find someone? Yes, that had to be it. Surely no one would leave a city like this abandoned. He just needed to look. Maybe dragons were just asleep. It was dark after all. Deciding he was going to find someone, Peacemaker turned from the ledge he stood on, unfurled his wings, and ascended into the night air to fly across the canyon to get a view of the city in the air. Peacemaker scanned the city below him, admiring the city's structure and architecture. By no means was he an archaeologist, but he admired art. Back when he was younger, Peacemaker tried to be an artist, but he was never satisfied with what he drew. He never seemed to get dragon faces right, much to his embarrassment. Every time his mother looked back at the drawings she wanted to save. At least with fruits and vegetables, you only need to worry about the conditions in which they grew in, and regularly taking care of them. Then they would come out just right. Whoever could draw or sculpt, they had Peacemaker's utmost respect. The same for whoever made the city out of the cliffside. Especially that marketplace in the center of the... Peacemaker's wings froze for just a moment, nearly knocking his flight off balance until he corrected himself, and quickly flapped his wings so he could hover and get a better look at what he had just seen. A marketplace several feet below him, with a wooden stage. Tilting his wings, Peacemaker began to descend, and he landed on the ground with a trot, mere feet from the stage in the center of the marketplace. He had seen this before. In his dreams. Or nightmare. Peacemaker's eyes widened as he stepped towards it, not quite wanting to walk onto it, especially where the ice wing normally stood. A surge of images entered his mind as he remembered the nightmares where he had ordered the ice wing to kill himself. It was only a nightmare, but it made Peacemaker feel guilty every time he thought back on it. Peacemaker held his eyes shut, squeezing his talons gently on the bridge of his muzzle, shaking his head. It was just a dream. It was just a dream. It was just a dream. Peacemaker whispered to himself, repeating his mantra. It was not real. It was not. Peacemaker paused as he felt something cold and sticky on his muzzle and talons. Opening his eyes, Peacemaker pulled his talons away from his head and looked at them, to see a dark blue liquid stained on them. Peacemaker's breathing increased as he bit back a scream, desperately wiping his talons in the dirt in an attempt to remove the ice wing blood from them. But the more he wiped his talons in the dirt, the more the blood seemed to cover his talons. And then the sound of thick drips of liquid caught his attention in front of him, and ice wing blood spilled from the stage onto the sand in front of him. Looking up, Peacemaker's eyes widened in horror as he saw an Ice Wing corpse lying on the stage. Peacemaker's heart fell as he recognized the Ice Wing, and the horrified expression forever etched onto his face as he lay on the stage. No, Peacemaker said, feeling sick to his stomach. No, no, no! He backed away, slowly, horrified at what he had done. I didn't mean to! He pleaded desperately to the body, knowing full well it could not hear him. Not daring to look back at the corpse any longer, Peacemaker spun around and took to the sky, flying for a ledge, far from the stage. Once he landed, Peacemaker bounded away from the center of the city, trying to put as much distance between himself and the corpse as possible. As he ran, Peacemaker had no idea where he was heading. Only thing he cared about was getting away. Some place to hide and wallow in the guilt that ate at his heart. A house with a blue door he ran by caught his attention. Deciding that was the perfect place to hide, Peacemaker shoved the door open and quickly entered. Peacemaker found himself in a comfortable-looking living room with a couch and a fireplace. But he was not alone, as a dragon sat in front of the fireplace, looking at something in front of her. Her scales and wing membranes were strange. Predominantly, her scales were black, like a nightwing's, but with a hint of blue in them. Her wing membranes and horns, however, were white, like an ice wing's. A hybrid, perhaps? Hello? Peacemaker said, nervously, trying to hide the ice wing blood on his talons. The dragon paid him no mind. Instead, her focus was solely on whatever was in front of her, out of Peacemaker's view. Feeling guilty about barging in and feeling bad for the dragon, Peacemaker slowly walked up to her. "I'm sorry for coming in here unannounced, but are you all right?" Peacemaker asked, standing only a few feet from her. Again, the dragon ignored him, sobbing over what looked to be a portrait of a family. Edging ever so closer, Peacemaker reached out and gently brushed the dragon with his wings, trying to comfort her. That's when she looked at him. Peacemaker's eyes met the dragon's, which were the deepest blue he had ever seen, and he found himself unable to look away from her own, as tears began to fall from his eyes almost uncontrollably, and his heart felt cold. Who are you?" Peacemaker asked. He did not know her, but looking deeply into her eyes, he felt like he should. And that is why he felt an overwhelming feeling of guilt. Why didn't he remember her? The dragon looked down at his blood-stained talons and closed her eyes, tears escaping her eyes as she did. Her talons reached down and touched his own, wrapping around them tightly. While still unsure of who she was, Peacemaker felt his talons instinctively do the same, gently squeezing her talons in his own. A sad smile tugged up on the dragon's lips as she looked back at Peacemaker. "You are no longer falling." Peacemaker knew he had awoken the moment his vision turned black. The dragon had disappeared and he felt the warmth of the blanket over him. But even with this knowledge, he refused to open his eyes. Instead, he squeezed them tight. "Come back! Please, come back!" he thought, loudly, feeling tears escape his eyes despite how much he squeezed them shut. He did not know why, but he did not want the dragon to go. He wanted to see her. He wanted her to stay. But no matter how loud he thought, the dream was gone, and so was the dragon. Opening his eyes, Peacemaker stared sadly at the center of his, Jaguar, and Cliff's sleeping cave. For the next few moments, he struggled to go back to sleep, wanting to dream again. He did not know why he wanted to see her so much, but Peacemaker felt warm around her. He wanted to know why he felt that way. Glancing at the window of the cave, Peacemaker saw that the sky outside was dark. That meant morning was still a ways out. Realizing he would not be going back to sleep anytime soon, the Nightwing-Rainwing hybrid stood up from his sleeping platform, brushed off his blanket, and walked quietly onto the floor of the sleeping cave. Jaguar and Cliff were asleep on their respective platform, ignorant of the world outside of their dreams. Cliff slept quietly, while Jaguar would occasionally toss and turn. With soft steps, Peacemaker left the sleeping cave and into the common area. Grabbing some pieces of wood from a stack, he gently placed the wood inside the fire pit in the center of the common cave, and blew out a small burst of flame and successfully ignited them, starting a comfortable fire that ever so slightly brightened the cave. Peacemaker dragged a cushion closer to the fire pit and sat on top of it while the fire warmed his scales. It had only been a few hours ago when the court's winglet had met each other in this cave. With the exception of Hyena and Alligator, who had been busy with extra duties in the prey center after their attempted theft of some ancient chalice that Thorn had gifted the Academy. While Peacemaker was not sure of Ermine, who tried to avoid Peacemaker's gaze if at all possible for some reason, he liked Cliff and Jaguar. Despite the rough start when they first met in the sleeping cave, Tempest seemed nice, though she mostly spent time with Ermine, and seemed to be the only one to successfully drag the Ice Wing's attention from her scrolls. But today was going to be the start of the Winglet's lessons, so now was the best chance for the seven to get to know each other. Hopefully the strawberries Peacemaker gave yesterday was a good welcome gift. Unfortunately, Hyena and Alligator never got theirs, so he hoped they would not mind. "Early riser?" Peacemaker, startled, looked up to see Tempest walk out of the sleeping cave she and Ermine had chosen. The Sea Wing made her way towards the center of the common cave, and sat on a cushion across from Peacemaker. The orange light of the flames reflected off her aqua-green scales, which Peacemaker admitted were nice. "Not really," Peacemaker admitted after a long enough moment of silence. "Just excited." That was, technically, not a lie, but neither was it the truth. Though Tempest seemed to accept the answer as she nodded with a, "I assume you get up early a lot?" Peacemaker asked her. "Most of the time, yes," Tempest answered. "My mom and dad were always big on getting my siblings and I up early." "Can't be worse than your mother trying to keep you up all night," Peacemaker muttered, not holding back the sigh. "Can't be worse than your mother trying to keep you up all night," Peacemaker muttered, not holding back the sigh. He loved his mother, but Peacemaker did not appreciate how his mother encouraged him early in his life to adjust to her sleep schedule. While most of Hope's generation had grown up on the volcanic island the rest of the Nightwings had lived on for centuries, She had lived on the Pyrean mainland for most of her life, and preferred to sleep during the day, rather than at night like a normal dragon. It is perfectly normal for a nightwing to sleep during the day. Our ancestors have always been nocturnal, she told him more than once. Besides, we are called nightwings for a reason. Peacemaker, even to this day, couldn't argue with that logic, but his brain told him otherwise. Every time he had breakfast when it was dark, he would be found sleeping in front of his food and had to be stirred awake by his mother. By the time Peacemaker had turned 2, his mother had stopped trying to convince him to change his sleep schedule due to all of his classes at school being during the day rather than the evening, despite Hope's attempts to convince Queen Glory to include night classes for her son. When the Queen disagreed with her suggestion, Hope reluctantly agreed it was the best for Peacemaker, as she wanted him to be closer for his friends. You are a Nightwing after all, chimed in Tempest, dragging Peacemaker out of his thoughts as he looked back at the Seawing, chuckling at her own comment. Yeah, well, I'm also half Rainwing, Peacemaker said, chuckling at the timing of Tempest's comment with his own thought, and raising his wings and showing off the different colored stars on his wing membranes. Tempest looked at them, clearly admiring them in the low-lit cave. They are beautiful, Tempest said, thoughtfully. Peacemaker could not help but blush at Tempest's words. Yeah, his friends back home said they looked cool, and his mom had said the stars looked beautiful, but to hear it from someone else, let alone someone he just met? It was weird to hear, but also nice. Thanks, Tempest, Peacemaker replied, trying to make sure he wasn't sounding cocky at the comment, because being cocky can be rude, and Peacemaker did not want to seem rude to his new clanmate. Tempest nodded at him, her smile ever present. Silence fell over the two clanmates, but Peacemaker would not say it was uncomfortable. There just did not feel like there was much needed to be said. If anything, the silence between them seemed comfortable. Eventually, however, the silence would be broken as the sun rose, and with it heralded the start of a new day, and the sound of a bronze gong being rung throughout the academy. The noise was met with some very reluctant risers, one of whom made his dislike of the noise well known as he stepped into the common cave. Okay, I'm up, came Jaguar's voice from within the sleeping cave Peacemaker, Cliff, and he shared. No need to wring our brains out. The half-awake, half-asleep Rainwing was the first to come out, with Cliff following close behind, both yawning. Morning, Cliff muttered, the Skywing sitting on a cushion around the fire, rubbing a talon over his eyelids. Peril was right. They do like to get us up early. There is lots of stuff to do, came the voice of Ermine, walking out of her and Tempest's sleeping cave, with a bag of scrolls around her neck. Peacemaker wondered if those were recreational scrolls, or were they all historical about the Icewing tribe, like the one she'd been reading yesterday. Instead of coming to join the rest of the winglet, Ermine appeared to go towards the walls of the common cave, examining a shelf of scrolls, all of which were owned by the school itself. Cliff sighed. But couldn't they not wake us up right as the sun rises? They could do that, Ermine answered, not taking her eyes away from the shelves, pulling a scroll out of a pile. But then we would not be able to get the head start on the lessons, nor get the chance to meet the other winglets. The last part, about meeting other winglets, did not seem to excite Ermine, but she did seem to look forward to the lesson. Peacemaker, on the other talon, still felt nervous about the first official day of classes, but he also felt excited about getting to work. 3 moons. He wished he either felt nervous or excited. So, what's our first class? Tempest asked, speaking for the first time since the others joined. She stood up to join Ermine at the shelves, as the latter appeared to be looking for a very specific scroll. Tribal cultures! Answered a new voice from the sleeping cave that had previously been empty when Peacemaker and the others had gone to bed last night. The 2 occupants of said sleeping cave, the Sandwing and the Mudwing of the winglet, Hyena and Alligator. Hyena walked ahead of Alligator, who looked as though he had only had a few moments of sleep last night. Peacemaker was silently impressed Hyena could be well awake and, for the most part, upbeat after being tasked by Tsunami with cleaning up the prey center after dinner. Ah, Tempest says, pulling out the scroll Ermine had been looking for, as she looked over at the 2 new arrivals with an amused smile. Looks like the 2 renegades have joined us. Alligator, adjusting the glasses in front of his eyes, sighed to himself at being called a renegade. It was Hyena's idea, Alligator muttered. That chalice belongs in a museum, she had said. The Mudwing glanced in Hyena's direction as she made her way towards a cushion. I stand by that statement, Hyena said, rather proudly. Come now, Alligator, you agreed with me? A piece of history that dates back to the reign of Queen Scorpion should be in a museum filled with other relics, not in a school. Yes, but I also said not to drag me into your reacquisition scheme, Alligator argued, with a sigh. At least I took the fall, Hyena pointed out. Along with me? And you could have left at any time, Hyena answered, shrugging her wings. Not with that glare Tsunami was giving, Alligator groaned, exasperated. To be honest, if Peacemaker had been in an Alligator situation, well, he was definitely glad that he had not been in Alligator's position. He might have frozen up and wished he could camouflage like a full-blooded rainwing if he was caught in one of Tsunami's angry glares. Anyways, Cliff interjected into the conversation before it could go on any longer. My name is Prince Cliff. Hyena interrupted the Skywing, much to Cliff's chagrin. The Sandwing's black eyes then turned to the others one by one, a talon pointed at each. Ermine, Tempest, Peacemaker, and Jaguar. Hyena winked at Peacemaker and the rest of the winglet. We may have been busy last night, but we got a chance to read in on the winglet after Alligator and I finished our fun last night. We may have been busy last night, but we got a chance to read on the winglet after Alligator and I finished our fun last night. Fun? Peacemaker asked, raising a brow. Cleaning up the prey center was fun to Hyena? But I would have thought cleaning up the prey center was a punishment. Oh, no, Peacemaker, Hyena corrected him, gently nudging Alligator in the shoulder. We got our work done, but we still had enough energy last night for some fun. Fun? Ermine asked, lowering her scroll, eyeing the two dragons curiously. What were you two doing that was fun in the middle of the night that required a bunch of... The Icewing's eyes suddenly widened, as if suddenly realizing something. Wait! Where do you... Were they what? Peacemaker wondered to himself. The others were looking at each other curiously. Even Alligator appeared confused at what the Icewing was asking. Cliff and Tempest's eyes suddenly widened in shock, as if they had just been struck by lightning. Shock. Jaguar appeared both impressed and surprised at what he had just heard. Alligator's eyes widened, and he was starting to stutter something in his defense, but the words didn't even come out. Instead, he covered his eyes in embarrassment. What? What could two dragons possibly be doing in the middle of the night that was... exciting? Oh, 3 moons! Wow, you guys! Hyena finally spoke up upon seeing Peacemaker's and the others' reactions. You all are sure acting quite surprised that Alligator and I were having lots of fun with the game of Scales and Squares. Wait, Scales and Squares? The board game? That's what she was talking about? Nothing else? Peacemaker sighed in relief, while Cliff, Ermine, and Tempest groaned and shook their heads at having been led to believe something else entirely. All the while, Jaguar was struggling not to laugh at what had just transpired. Alligator, on the other talon, still covered his eyes and sighed. Hyena, the Mudwing groaned, recovering from the short-term embarrassment. Finally, Hyena let out a fake gasp of offense, as if hurt that her words had been taken the wrong way. Though, to be fair, Peacemaker had to admit that they kind of had been. Why, I have to say I am shocked, Hyena gasped, her mock-hurt tone still present in her voice. I have to say, you have some pretty dirty minds if you think our game of Scales and Towns was anything else. From the corner of his eye, Peacemaker saw Ermine walking away from the shelves and towards the exit of the common cave. If you'll excuse me, Ermine announced, sliding the scrolls she collected into her bag. I'm going to hunt breakfast. That way I don't have to put up with whatever nonsense our clawmate will think up next. As Ermine left the cave, Tempest was nodding, though perhaps not in agreement with most of what her Icewing friend had just said. She does have a point, Tempest said, standing up. We should get ready for breakfast. Our class will be in an hour. Cliff stretched his wings, the bones in them making soft popping noises, as they worked out the early morning kinks in them. No complaints here, the prince answered as he got off his own cushion. I'm going to get in an early flight while I can before class. Cliff then looked out at his winglet. Anyone want to join? Ugh, pass, yawned Jaguar as he walked out of the common cave, though it looked like Cliff did not mind that rejection. Well, Peacemaker thought, maybe a flight would work out the excitement and nervousness from his body. I'll come, Peacemaker offered. The Skywing Prince looked at him and smiled brightly. Well, all right then, Cliff said, turning around and began to walk out of the common cave, with Peacemaker not far behind. As the two walked through the system of tunnels which made up the academy, Peacemaker would occasionally see other dragons starting to leave their commons and roam the caves, all going about new morning routines. Some, like Peacemaker and Cliff, were making their way outside for an early morning flight, while others went to the Prey Center for a quick and easy breakfast. When the two dragons from the Quartz Winglet found one of the exits that overlooked a forested area at the Jade Mountain, both Peacemaker and Cliff trotted forward, and, once they were outside, took flight into the clear morning sky just as the sun began to peek over the horizon. Taking a deep breath of the cool morning air, Peacemaker could not help but smile as he and Cliff ascended into the sky. Seeing the sun rise made him feel more relaxed, making him no longer think about the nightmare he had had hours earlier. Beside him, Cliff performed a loop in the air, and then skillfully leveled himself out in the air before performing 2 more aerial loops. The Skywing then proceeded to dive down towards the trees below them, and actually flew into the forest area itself, causing Peacemaker to lose sight of him, and he thought Cliff may have crashed. But Cliff came soaring out of the trees and back into the air. Flying back to Peacemaker, Cliff was grinning excitedly. Always good to do that, Cliff said happily. You could easily crash at that speed and path, Peacemaker replied, relieved the prince hadn't smashed into a tree. Your concern is appreciated, but I am quite the skilled flyer at said speeds, Cliff said, winking at Peacemaker. Don't you normally fly in the rainforest? Well, yeah, Peacemaker answered, but nowhere near the speed of that dive. I mean, Rainwing's tree swing, but even they need to make sure they're not about to collide with something. Well, maybe a little practice will help, Cliff offered. Always the best way to outmaneuver someone is by putting lots of objects between them and you. No, thanks, Peacemaker replied, much preferring not to get in flight training at now of all times. You go and hunt, and I'll meet you back at the cave entrance. Where are you going? Cliff asked him curiously, as Peacemaker was about to descend into the forest. Looking up at the Skywing, Peacemaker smiled. Looking for some fruits, preferably strawberries. He did not mind hunting, but he much preferred picking fruit than hunting prey. For some reason, he just did not have the stomach for ending another creature's life, even if it was an animal or scavenger. No matter how many times Hope took Peacemaker out on hunts, he would wander the forest and collect fruits and vegetables. There were times Peacemaker thought his mother would be disappointed, but whenever he would come back with bags full of fruits and vegetables, she'd only smile and say she was impressed with his gathering skills. Cliff, despite frowning at Peacemaker's statement, nodded at him. All right, Cliff answered, diving down to an area of the woods below them. See you in a while, Cliff called out as he disappeared into the trees. Smiling, Peacemaker flew down into a different area of the woods, preferably far from where other dragons hunted, so he could gather his breakfast in peace. Once reaching the tree line, Peacemaker made sure to maneuver carefully through the trees he flew towards, but while making sure to keep his flight strong enough to move through the air. Once he felt he was a good distance from where the other dragons would hunt, he began his descent to the ground, landing with a slight skid. Despite these woods being much different than the rainforest, which had bigger trees and much more cover, Peacemaker felt he had a good idea of where to find potential berry bushes, or trees that bore fruit. He just needed to find them, and get some food to help him fully wake up. He still felt a little tired, despite the brief flight he took with Cliff. Moments passed as Peacemaker walked around the woods, and, to his luck, he found a tree producing a bunch of apples. Not perfectly ripe, but still enough to eat. Not strawberries, but they will at least wake me up all the way, Peacemaker thought as he noticed some greenness still present on the surface. A little tartness hurts no one, he concluded, as he leaned up towards a branch to reach for the closest apple he saw. You don't deserve this. Peacemaker froze, his talons stopping mere inches after he heard a small voice touch his ear, whispering softly, causing his scales to shiver. Edging away from the apple tree, Peacemaker crouched down to 4 legs, turning around in the direction of where he had thought the voice had come from. But there was no one, only trees and bushes, and maybe a few animals scurrying away at the sight of him. Swallowing a little, Peacemaker shook his head. Probably still tired, Peacemaker muttered to himself as he turned back to the apple tree and proceeded to pluck the apple. A little snack to wake the day, Peacemaker hummed, the beginning of a nursery song he and his friends made back when they were 1-year-old dragonettes, whenever they had breakfast together. After taking a bite of the apple, Peacemaker smiled and continued, Another bite to send us into the day, bright and happy.
Oh, you wish that, don't you?
Peacemaker's heart almost jumped out of his chest again as he heard the voice from a few moments ago, but this time normally rather than a whisper. And, like before, it came from behind him. Spinning around again, Peacemaker managed to see movement from a tree limb up above him, moving quickly out of his sight.
You will have no happiness.
To his left, Peacemaker just barely caught the glimpse of something large jump. A dragon?
You will have no brightness.
Again, the dragon evaded his sight, this time having just jumped from a tree right in front of him and out of view.
Only fear.
The voice had been behind him.
Only sadness.
To the right, but closer.
Only terror.
Closer!
And then...
The voice, it was right above him. Peacemaker's eyes widened as he saw the shape of a dragon's shadow eclipse him.
When I see fit.
Peacemaker slowly rose his head, his breathing cold and fast.
It will end.
Above him, the dragon descended upon him. All he could do was scream. Peacemaker, come on! Wake up! Peacemaker awoke with a jolt, his eyes open wide. Easy, easy, came the voice beside him. Looking up, Peacemaker saw the normally calm and collected Tempest standing beside him, one of her talons touching his shoulder. She had been shaking him awake. Tempest? Peacemaker asked, still groggy. The Sea-Wing sighed, relieved, and slowly reverted to her calm expression, smiling at him with relief. What happened? She asked Peacemaker. I fell asleep, he said, hoping the Sea-Wing would not ask any more questions. But, of course, she did. In the middle of the forest? She responded, raising a brow. Is this because you woke up early? Peacemaker nodded, looking around. He found himself right at the place he had landed. No footsteps were present where he walked. He must have fallen asleep upon landing? He really must have been tired. Not much sleep last night, like I said, Peacemaker said, truthfully. Not really used to sleeping in the cave at all. I guess I should have went back to sleep after talk this morning. This seemed to cause Tempest to nod and agree with him. Fair enough, I suppose. Tempest shrugged. Like I said, still trying to get used to this place. Peacemaker sighed at that. Nice to know he wasn't the only one who missed home a little. Maybe Tempest, despite traveling, had favorite spaces to rest. The sound of a bronze gong suddenly rang in the distance, bringing both students' attention towards the academy. The first bell, Tempest said in realization. We have 2 more rings until we're late. Peacemaker nodded and quickly followed his clawmate as both quickly ascended into the air. Flying to the academy entrance, Peacemaker saw Cliff quickly fly towards him and Tempest. While Peacemaker greeted his clawmate, Tempest looked at the Skywing Prince, greeted him, and then returned focus on flying to the school. Cliff asked Peacemaker how his breakfast went, which Peacemaker responded by saying it was okay. In reality, he was hungry. He did not get the chance to get any breakfast. That meant the day would start off slow and he would have to contend with a slightly needy stomach. He wouldn't starve, of course, but it would be long. And then there was the nightmare. No, we shouldn't think that. Just focus on class. When the 3 Dragonets landed at the academy entrance, they quickly bounded for the cave where they would be taking a class on the cultures of the different tribes of Pyria while covering those of the Bantalan continent. To their luck, they arrived during the second ring of the gong. By now, the cave was just starting to fill with a few Dragonets from the Jade Winglet, while Ermine, Hyena, Jaguar, and Alligator were present and seated. In front of the cave was one of the former Dragonets of Destiny, the one who had come up with the plan herself in order to end the Sandwing War of Succession 8 years ago. Sunny, the Sandwing Nightwing hybrid, daughter of Queen Thorn and the Animus Nightwing Stone Mover. Despite not having met many Sandwings, aside from Moon's mate Kibbley and Hyena, Peacemaker thought it was strange the almost golden yellow dragon did not have the ever-dangerous barbed tail the Sandwings were famous for. But, to be honest, Peacemaker thought the dangerous tail would have taken away from the kind and nurturing personality Sunny was known for, and was displaying as she greeted each of her students. When she finally had the chance to greet Peacemaker, she stopped and smiled at him. "And you must be Peacemaker," she said. He nodded in response. "Glory said a lot of good things about you. Moon as well." "Thanks," Peacemaker answered, smiling at his teacher. "It's a pleasure to meet you." Sunny nodded in response. I checked your grade reports. I know you struggled with history, and this class will cover some history in it. A warm wing gently touched Peacemaker's shoulder. If you need any help, don't hesitate to ask your classmates or your teachers for help. He nodded, appreciating her offer. By the time the third gong was heard, all the classes had arrived and were seated. While most of the quartz winglets sat together, Peacemaker saw that Ermine sat away from her winglet, sitting beside another icewing, a male. Looking at both of them, side by side, Peacemaker noticed a resemblance. Like Ermine, the icewing had dark blue tail spikes and small blue scales on his face, not unlike Ermine herself. It quickly dawned on Peacemaker that Ermine was most likely sitting beside a relative. The lesson began with Sunny greeting her students as a group, and explaining the lessons the class would be covering over the course of the term. As Sunny began to explain the different creation stories of the different tribes, Peacemaker felt Tempest tap her wing closest to him. Glancing over the sea wing, Peacemaker saw Tempest slide over berries. Wait, not just any berries. 6 strawberries! Here, Tempest whispered. Thanks, Peacemaker answered quietly and excitedly as he quickly tossed a strawberry into his mouth while no one was looking. He didn't want to eat while Sunny was talking, but he was hungry. Are you sure you're okay? Tempest asked after Peacemaker finished the third strawberry. Peacemaker nodded, giving her a reassuring smile. I am, Peacemaker responded, appreciatively. Cliff, having heard what was said, whispered, What's up? Peacemaker smiled. He didn't want to concern too many dragons, but Cliff would most likely not drop it if Peacemaker said nothing. I fell asleep in the rainforest, Peacemaker admitted. Really? Cliff asked, shocked. You okay? Yeah, I was just tired, Peacemaker assured. Tempest woke me up and we flew back together. Well, if you're all right, Cliff said, before going back to the stroll in front of him. Just be careful when flying, all right? While the advice was blunt, Peacemaker appreciated the prince's concern. Tempest looked like she wanted to say more, but stopped when Sunny started to ask the class questions and looked like she would rather save her questions for another time. Soon, Peacemaker was caught up in the motion of listening to Sunny and writing what she was saying on a piece of parchment in front of him, taking in everything she said. While the nightmare in the woods still flashed through his mind when he least expected it, the focus on school soon caused the dream to go into the back of his mind and no longer scare him as much. But, like the nightmares with the Iceman killing himself, the dream still left a shiver down his spine. A shiver that made Peacemaker dread going to sleep that night.